Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
As a hostage negotiator, we use human nature-based principles that have been shown to work in every culture on the planet. The hostage negotiators in Tokyo, Japan use the same skills that ones in Newark, New Jersey use, the same skills the ones in Cape Town, South Africa use. So I know from having negotiated in every culture on the planet that this is a trap that everybody's had used on them over and over and over again. We feel slimy because we got tricked into this a couple of times already, and we were used as a result of it.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show, we have the return of Chris Voss. And I've got to say, Chris Voss's last episode that we put out on YouTube is the most downloaded show that we've ever put out there. So you guys obviously resonated with it, and you guys obviously shared it. So I appreciate that, Sales Nation. On today's show, very specifically, and it's almost a follow-up of what we talked about last time, we're diving into the topic of getting anyone to do anything. There's some moral kind of guidelines that come along with this show that we touch on a little bit, but that's essentially the topic. If you want to learn more about Chris, if you want to learn more about this topic, if you want to learn more about negotiation, I can highly recommend his book, Never Split the Difference. It's available on Amazon. It's available in the show notes over at salesman.red/186. You can also find his previous episode there as well. And so with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Chris, and welcome back to the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks, Will. Happy to be here. It's a lot of fun to talk with you.
Good, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time and coming back on the show. And we're going to dive into it's probably quite a broad topic, which we'll narrow down, and we'll get tactical towards the end of the show, perhaps. Not perhaps, for sure. That's where I want to end up with this. But the topic of the show, how to talk anyone into anything, sounds quite crazy. And where I want to start with all this is, if you're skilled enough, is that possible? Is that sentence a feasible reality?
You know, this always makes interactions better every single time. One caveat is, if you talk somebody into something that they really don't want to do, then they're not going to implement. So, but the amount of latitude that we have over what we do and we don't do depends so much on what we care about and how we perceive things, that, there's a reason why these skills are so powerful, and a reason why Adam Grant recently wrote a piece called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence, because this is so enormously powerful. So, yeah, that is, use your powers for good and not evil on this.
So is that the key to all of this then? We perhaps might have just jumped straight to the end of the show and we'll fill in the middle. But if you've got all the skills, you can convince someone to do something. But in reality, are you convincing them to do it in the moment? But if they really don't want to do it, they're just going to fall back and never end up, I think you use the word implementing there.
Right. Well, if you try to trap people with yes, which is one of the most common things that are done, I mean, that's really makes deals that don't last. We like to say yes is nothing without how.
And what do you mean by that, trapping people with yes? What's an example?
Would you like to make more money? Would you like to have more free time? Would you like to live in this vast mansion on the Hollywood Hills? It's kind of a trap of breadcrumbs, and it's such a habit. I actually had one of my students in the MBA course. He had a long-time client that he was notified that she was changing her accounts. He was an investment advisor, and she was scared to talk to him. She had her secretary call his secretary. And he thought he had a great relationship with her, and he called her on the phone, and she said, I just didn't want you to talk me into something again that I didn't want to do. And he didn't realize that he was using, quote, logic traps, which were littered with answers to yes. And he was so good at adept at talking her into things, with the yes trap, the mere agreement, the yes momentum, that he could always talk her into something on the phone. He would sound so logical. And she knew that there was something instinctively wrong with this. And finally, she didn't even want to talk to him on the phone anymore at all. And that's what ends up happening. I mean, if you use yes to trick people into something in a moment, what happens is your deal falls through and they stop wanting to talk to you. So you have to get out of that. Now, the flip side of it is once you start dealing with people on an emotional level and understanding we use the phrase, know what their religion is. Because religion has been used throughout the centuries to talk people into ridiculous things. I mean, there's these monumental pyramids in India that would be construction feats today, and they were built 1,000 years ago. And they talk people into working their entire lives away for nothing because it would save their soul. So if you know what somebody's religion is, and you can tap into that, when was the last time somebody talked hundreds of workers into working their entire life basically for food only and to be happy about it? So there's some crazy stuff that's available here, and everything that I talk about is really predicated on you're coming from a moral place, and you have a good sense of right and wrong. And I've had conversations with some international banking friends of mine. A good friend of mine is the head of an international bank, and I say, let me do this stuff because I can work magic with it. And he said, well, that's the problem. He says, you're driven by moral principles and this kind of influence. If you're driven by moral principles, then it's okay. But if you're not, that's why sociopaths take advantage of people, because they use emotional intelligence to talk people into crazy things. Charles Manson. Just some of this stuff, once you really understand how powerful it is, it's amazing what you can get people to do with it.
And do we know all this innately? What I mean by that is that the slimy, and I'm using that word specifically, online marketers who are, become an entrepreneur, grow your business, do this, and this coincides with, perhaps 10 years ago, it was late night advertisements for this miracle thing that's going to give you abs. I don't know. That's just one example that comes to mind. And obviously that resonated with me, and I wanted abs as a 16-year-old, even though that never happened. But those come across as slimy. And those adverts, as you were saying, hey, do you want to lose weight? Hey, do you want to have more free time? Hey, do you want to have have more money? These all coincide with that. Is that an innate feeling that we all have when we're approached this way, that we feel that we're being manipulated and we feel slimy and gross because of it, even though perhaps it works in the moment?
Yeah, right. And because we've all been walked down that path so many times. And it happens in every culture. I mean, one of the advantages to my approach to negotiation, if I can say it, is as a hostage negotiator, we use human nature-based principles that have been shown to work in every culture on the planet. Hostage negotiators in Tokyo, Japan, use the same skills that ones in Newark, New Jersey use, the same skills the ones in Cape Town, South Africa use, the same skills in Manila in the Philippines, because these are human nature-based skills. So I know from having negotiated in every culture on the planet that this is a trap that everybody's had used on them over and over and over again. We feel slimy because we got tricked into this a couple of times already, and we were used as a result of it. And so now that's our instinctive reaction. We're like battered children with yes. I mean, across the planet, we all react the same way when somebody tries to trap us with yes. And when we get fooled by it, we're mad at ourselves. It's a friend of mine says, look for the people with a flat forehead. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, that's the guy that went like, oh my God, got me again.
Okay, so we want to talk anyone into anything. What is the first step here? Is it finding the religion? And we'll go through perhaps the first step rather than the biggest bang for buck, and we come on to that in a bit. But what's the first thing that we should be doing? Moral implications aside for the moment, what's the first step?
Well, the first step is, do the crazy answers, do the flip side of trying to get them to say yes. And instead of looking at no as an obstacle, no as a means. And the first person that ever did this that I was coaching, a political fundraiser, and instead of saying, would you like to take the White House back in November, said, have you given up on taking the White House back in November? And so instead of looking at no as the enemy, understanding what happens to somebody when they say no. So when I say no, I protect myself, and I automatically become more relaxed, and I'm more interested in learning. Plus, it also triggers something else that's very powerful. It's the sense of loss. And there's some psychologists that believe that literally every single decision we make is based on our fear of loss. Now, I'm not sure if it's every decision, but it's really high on the hit parade. And so if you can trigger a fear of loss, I mean, you snap somebody's attention right away. We send out a lot of emails on a regular basis to people who have stopped responding to us. One-line emails. Have you given up on this project? I tell people when you send that email, be ready for an answer in 3 to 5 minutes. And nearly 1,000% of the time, that's what happens. The person, as soon as they see it, immediately responds. And the guy who is, I was explaining it to the guy who's my book agent, and in the midst of explaining it to him, he says, "Oh my God, somebody just did this to me the other day." And he said, "I had an immediate reaction, and it was visceral, and I had to reach out to him right away." And he said, "I didn't even realize it happened at the time until you explained it to me." The two important points about that is, number one, you get an immediate reaction. And number two, they have no idea that you triggered it. So while it is an immediate and visceral reaction on their part, they don't necessarily connect it to you, but they connect it to the environment, and they actually see you as somebody they're kind of rescuing. So when they reach out to you, having been hit with this electric jolt, they're in a very positive frame of mind to you and very open to talking with you. It's ridiculously powerful.
I've got a big grin on my face, Chris, because I am literally going to send that email to our email list when this show goes live. Probably cut this bit of the show and make it into a separate video, because I think that's super actionable and useful, and it has the depth of the psychology behind it as well. So everyone, there's going to be so many people listening to the show now who will get the email, open it, and it'll probably be something along the lines of, "Have you given up on the Salesman Podcast?" or something like that. And then they'll realize that I'm talking about this show that they've just listened to, and they'll be face palming that they've just been influenced that way. And moving on from that, then, so you've got your you've got a series of these perhaps in place. What is the next step to go deeper? And if it isn't finding the religion, perhaps we can come on to that, 'cause you really piqued my interest with that. I feel like there's a lot to go at with that particular topic in general.
No, it's a perfect question, because once you've created this cattle prod of a response, the question is where to from there. And the answer to is that's when you really want to drive for a "that's right" response from the other person. Because that triggers, again, it triggers multiple things psychologically that work in your favor. And I've got a friend of mine, a client that we're coaching now, who's with one of the large mega internet providers. And he says that more often than not, when I employ this, people talk themselves into the deal that I wanted all along. And triggering "that's right," we say "that's right" when we've reached an epiphany moment. I mean, and you never say, when you completely pronounce something as the complete and utter truth, you never say "you're right." You say "that's right." And that's actually where you want to go right after you've triggered the no. In many cases, if you need to trigger the no to get a non-responder going again, they've got some dilemma in their life that they're struggling with. They're trying to obtain an epiphany, some sort of clarity anyway. And when you clear their mind enough so that they're open to an epiphany or clarity, you want the "that's right" response. And at that moment, here's the range of deals that have been triggered that were almost immediately made on the spot. Terrorist case, $10 million ransom demand. We took them from $10 million to zero in one conversation. When we got a terrorist, sociopathic killer, to say "that's right" to something that we just put in front of them.
And what sort of, I don't know if you can dive into that at all, but what would be the wording, the questions, and what paint a bit more of a picture around that, because that sounds fascinating.
Here's the hard part. Articulating their point of view, stating it in a way that almost sounds like it's against your interests. And that's the big barrier for everyone in triggering a "that's right" moment. Because what I coach my negotiator, and what I really am is an international deal-making coach. I coach far more negotiations than I've ever been in. I flatter myself to think of myself as Phil Jackson. The NBA coach. Phil Jackson was a fairly good NBA player, but he's one of the best coaches that ever lived, because he studied it so hard and he had to struggle as a player to get better. It wasn't natural to him. He never started on any NBA team. He has more championships rings than anybody else. And I coach people. But getting back to your question, what are we trying to do? Articulate it from their point of view. With this particular terrorist, we said, you're not seeking ransom. You're looking for economic damages because the people of your region have been harmed. had gone through 500 years of oppression, from the Spanish to the Japanese to the Americans, which was all the nonsense that he was spewing. When we spewed his nonsense right back to him and then added back into him how he felt about it, which essentially completely took all of his punch, all of the power out of his punches. It's amazing what you do to someone, with someone, when you beat them to the punch on what they want to say. It just kind of takes the wind out of their sails. And then they feel connected to you. And they want to cooperate with you. And if we could do it with a sociopath, then you could do it with anybody. And we did. And so we articulated it completely from his point of view. And he literally said on the phone to the negotiator that I was coaching, he said, "That's right." And we went from $10 million to zero in one conversation. Take the same thing, pharmaceutical sales person. She's trying to sell a doctor who's in her territory, who's just not buying the latest drug, the hottest drug that they have from her corporation. And she realizes that she's got to articulate from his point of view. She makes an appointment with him. She sits down. And again, she basically, what most people would say, is almost badmouths her position. She said, you're not just going to buy some drug from me because it's a high profit drug. Your patients are important to you. You see them more as just patients, but they're people, and you're responsible for their lives. And you're not just going to take my latest product from me because I'm trying to sell it. Almost as if she's trying to talk him out of the deal, flirting with that almost. She said he turned and looked at her as if it was the first time he'd ever seen her. And he said, "That's right." And the barriers came down and she made the sale.
So how do you go then from because I appreciate that from the standpoint of building rapport, building trust, building massive trust in an instant. How do you go then from undermining your message and perhaps why you're there in the first place somewhat, to then getting them to change their mind and accepting, to use the pharmaceutical sales example, for them to go, "Hey, okay, you're on my wavelength, you understand where I'm coming from." How do you stop them just going, "Okay, fine," and then shutting the door in your face, and versus going, "Hey, okay, maybe I need to rethink this and I will end up buying it," if that makes sense?
Right. Well, that's what we're horrified by, that they'll say "that's right" and then slam the door in our face. And the scary thing about this is that never happens. I think I've literally coached thousands of people with this method, and not one time has anyone gotten a negative response to it. That's right. Not one single time has the door been slammed or the conversation even taken a turn for the worse.
Why not? Because it seems logical that you, in that situation again, the doctor goes, "Yes, that's right. Okay, why are you still here? Okay, I'm busy. Let me get on with what I'm doing." Even though I appreciate that perhaps they are, they've built that rapport, they've built that trust, and he might, be thinking in his head, "Oh, next time she comes in, I'll speak to her because she'll be straight with me." But what I'm not getting is I'm getting that it works in reality. What I don't understand is the psychology behind why it because it seems counterintuitive, like the behavioral psychology about why it actually makes that difference.
Well, one of the reasons is, and some of this has been actually shown scientifically, is that when we identify negatives or when we identify barriers, we simply identify them. I don't know who thought this up, but there was actually a scientific experiment that was conducted where wires were connected to the amygdala, which is where all of our thoughts on our brain roll through the amygdala. Some people refer to it as reptile brain. Some people refer to it as a caveman brain. It literally puts a spin on every single thought that we have. And now with magnetic resonance imaging being used on brains, we can track electrical activity in brains. And now they've isolated where the negative activity in the amygdala is and where the positive activity in the amygdala. And in this portion of the brain, there's actually about 4 times as much real estate, if you will, dedicated processing negative thoughts as opposed to positive thoughts. And that's why negative thoughts are almost 4 times the barriers to any deal. And while what appreciation does is it quiets this part of the brain. And they've shown in these experiments that when barriers are simply identified, the electrical activity in the negative part of the brain drops dramatically, which means the negative thoughts that are getting in the way, the barriers to our deals, almost disappear, sort of leaving the positive side functioning and giving it the ability to take over. One of our philosophies is that if you can eliminate the barriers, there's a pretty good chance the positives will take over and make your deal for you. As one of my clients says, more often than not, which is actually Las Vegas odds. If more often than not you bet on 7, then you go to 7 and you bet on 7, you walk away a billionaire very quickly. More often than not, the positive takes over and makes the deal for you. Or worst case scenario, and it's the flip side of never be mean to someone who could hurt you by doing nothing. Literally everybody we interact with has the ability to hurt us by doing nothing. If you're willing to accept that, then the flip side is true. They can always help us by doing something positive, even if it's moving us towards the front of the line, the top of their inbox instead of the bottom of their inbox. Make somebody mad who's an order taker, and your order goes to the bottom of the inbox. So they always have the ability to hurt you. If they can always hurt you, they can always help you. And one more maxim to understand, never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. Don't take tunnel vision into a deal. Focused on a goal means you have tunnel vision. So you have to be a little bit flexible. You have to be willing to the ridiculous, to see what happens with a that's right, not knowing where it's going to go, but just take it from the deal maker and coach, the hostage negotiator. It's going to be good.
I love it. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. That's cleared it up for me. And it seems like you've almost got to take the potential. It may happen of one step back, but then the guard drops, the reptilian barriers that are up to protect you physically that shouldn't be necessarily involved in negotiation drop. So it allows you to that one step back, which brings you 50 steps forward, which is good. I understand that better now, so I appreciate that, Chris. You've teased us a little bit with it, but I think this is perhaps the most important thing about what we're going to talk about today, because this allows us to get to that question that shifts everything in our favor, and that is understanding the other person's viewpoint. Now, is this something that that we should learn as a skill to be able to do in the moment when we meet that person? That there's a series of questions, or you've got your experience and your knowledge to be able to do it on the fly ad hoc, or should we be doing massive research before the fact to get as best a picture as what we possibly can about that individual and their viewpoints before we even walk in the room?
All right, some research. Some people want to do massive amounts of research and are horrified at getting caught off guard at the table. And they will spend 2 weeks trying to find out answers that they could have gotten in 10 minutes in a negotiation. So first of all, look at the negotiation process as part of your research. Do enough so that the other person feels like you took the time to find out about them, but the rest of it, they're dying to tell you. They're not only dying to tell you, but they're dying to put their spin on it. So minimal amount of appreciation. I would say that there's a 7-to-1 rate of return. In the first 10 minutes to hour of prep, 10 minutes to hour of research. Once you start going past an hour of preparation, you're probably wasting your time. You're probably doing very inefficient. So showing enough appreciation that you've taken the time to look at them initially, doing what's called get good at cold reads. And a lot of it doesn't take a genius to figure out. It's just that we're afraid to say. And as soon as you start talking about from the other person's perspective, they're going to want to say, that's right. And then they're going to want to add to it. They're going to want to give you even more information. Like if you're a salesperson, it doesn't take a genius to say to somebody on the other side, I bet you're tired of salespeople who talk you into things that you really don't want. The person on the other side is going to say to themselves, this is an interesting guy. And that's the kind of phrase, because at that moment, they're completely focused on you. The noise in their head has gone away. They're a lot less worried, and they're really kind of interested in hearing what you have to say next, which is the moment you're trying to create. At that point in time, they're at least listening, and that's where you're trying to go.
And how deep do we have to go with these questions? Because that question of, about you're sick of salespeople wasting your time, you could go one step deeper of, I know you're a very busy person because of X, Y, Z. Or you go deeper that, you are clearly very busy in your job, so this is affecting your personal life. And so I want to, my service helps you, spend more time with your family. And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper with the questions. How do you know how deep you have to go? And is it always better to go as deep as you possibly can with this, or is there a sweet point?
You experiment a little bit with it by being willing to go silent. Some people are horrified of going silent in a conversation because they feel that they've lost control. Well, the secret to gaining the upper hand in a negotiation is giving the other side the illusion of control. And much of that is taking a moment. It's an actual skill. It's called an effective pause, and it's called an effective pause because it's effective. So you'll stop occasionally, and you'll let them respond, and let them fill in the silence. And typically, silence in most cases in the context means people want to hear more. If you go silent, you're signaling to the other person you want to listen, which people love. If they go silent, that means they're guarded, but they want to hear more. And so their silence can be a trigger for you to talk some more. So if you go in tentatively, waiting for the moment when they start talking themselves into a deal, they can't talk themselves into the deal if you're talking. And no deal sticks like one that they've talked themselves into. You talk them into a deal and you get what happened with my student and his client. They stop talking to you. Not only that, but they'll only communicate to you through others. When they talk themselves into deals, then here's the flip side. They talk to you all the time. You have to manage that, which is a great problem to have.
Brilliant. And I want to wrap up this part of the show, Chris, with perhaps the end of this process somewhat, in that, how do you know when you're ready to walk away from the negotiation, you think it's all wrapped up, when you think you have got anyone to do anything? How do you know whether that's actually stuck, whether they are just full out lying to get you out of their office so that they can follow up with the assistant and tell you in a polite email to, sod off and don't come back? And how do you know, because there's varied degrees of that, of when they're just lying, to your face, when they are perhaps, semi-warm, lukewarm to the idea. And then the far end is perhaps when they think they're engaged, they think they're on board, and then a few hours later they realize that it isn't for them. How do you judge that? And the follow-up questions that will be, how do you then, or what do you do with that information?
Well, great question. There's two things to do. Yes is nothing without how. So if you think they're agreeing just to get you out of the office and they're not going to implement, first of all, your instincts are probably pretty good. This mystical thing called intuition is recognition. And so if your gut instinct is something here is they're just giving me yes, yes, yes to get me out of the office, then pivot to your hows. Yes is nothing without how. How are we going to implement this? How's this going to happen? And double down on the hows a couple of times. And when they go dead silent on the hows, it tells you one of two things. Either they were lying to you, or they just hadn't thought it through. And, lying is so common because as a defensive reaction, because people don't know where to go. They're tired of being trapped with yes. So you got to pivot to how anyway. And they may not have thought it through. There's no difference between someone who has no idea how to get something done and someone who's overtly lying to you. And in either case, it's not going to happen, and you have to solve the how anyway. The sooner you pivot to how, the sooner you know whether or not you've got a deal. The second part is if you think that you've done everything you can and there's no deal to be had, and I have so many people I've coached have pulled no deal into a real deal out of the fire by simply finishing this, because it's most important how you finish a conversation. People don't remember conversations how they happen. They remember them for the most intense moment and how they ended. Mm-hmm. Our Broadway in the United States has known this forever when they say, give them a good finish and they'll forgive you for anything. So you always want to make sure your conversations end on a positive note. And a great way to tie up a conversation is, I appreciate your time. It seems like there's nothing I could say to make this work out. What your intention is to show them respect, and you want to end it on a positive note and show them that you can have no deal and walk away. And more often than not, very high percentage of the time, the other person has responded in the moment and said, you know what, here's what it would take.
So you ask that question and then you leave a pause, is that correct?
Exactly right. Seems like there's nothing I could do to make this work. A pause is 3 seconds, which when you get used to it is a very quick time. When you're not used to effective pauses, it seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
But 3 seconds is all you have to wait and look at them. And at that point in time, either they're coming back with what they need to make the deal, or they're shaking your hand and they're thanking you for the time.
Fantastic. I feel like we've gone through this very quickly, but this is almost a 101 of negotiation. So I really appreciate that, Chris. I feel like we've gone from start to finish here. And I'll write this up in the show notes as well for everyone listening. And we'll talk about your book in a minute, which is clearly the best resource for anyone who wants to dive into this further. But I've got a few questions that I ask everyone that comes on the show. Chris, these are quick fire questions, but if you feel like it needs a longer answer, feel free to dive a bit deeper into it. The first one, which do you prefer, rock or pop music?
I'm a little bit of a classic rock guy. I'm willing to admit that.
Nice. What's, if possible, dollar size, what's the biggest deal you've ever closed?
All right, I've coached someone through $1 billion deal. I personally closed $1 million deals, but I've coached much bigger deals than I've ever been involved in. And our current client now has closed $100 million deals with the same skills that we use between a husband and a wife over a Christmas tree.
Love it. Okay, next one. What is one book or resource other than your own that you'd recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
A colleague in town here, a guy named Christopher Kai, has got a book out there that I like called Big Game Hunting, which is about networking. And I like Chris's book a lot. He's a really innovative guy. He's also a student of Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote the all-time classic Never Eat Alone, which is also a networking book, which happened to be co-written by my co-author, Tal Ross. Both of those books are really good. And I'll throw one more book out. Anything written by Adam Grant. Adam Grant's got Give and Take and Originals out there, those two books. Adam Grant's a brilliant guy. I like his stuff.
Nice. We'll link to all them in the show notes over at salesman.red. Chris, what does the first 60 minutes of your morning look like?
I'm queuing myself up mentally. A couple of different meditations, very short and sweet things. I know that appreciation puts me in a positive frame of mind, which then means I'm smarter. I'm very mercenary about my appreciation. So, I'll get out of bed and I want to cue myself up into an appreciative mindset so that I will enjoy the day. I write down things that I'm grateful for to start the day. So then spiritually it's good for me and intellectually I'm smarter the more positive my frame of mind is, the more I enjoy the day as opposed to being inflicted with it.
Love it. I'm glad you brought up gratitude. It's something that comes up with the highly successful people that come on the show like yourself. It's something that when I first started mentioning it on the show, I got responses from the audience of, it's a bit woo-woo and like hippie-ish to be writing down things that you're grateful for every morning. But it's something I do, and there is studies and the psychology behind it, but it's enough for me that I feel that when I write down the 5 things that I'm grateful for, they usually start off being the obvious ones, like I've got a roof over my head. By the time I get to the 5th or 6th, it's something that I probably never really thought about before, and so it does make me ponder for that second, and that's enough to get me out of you wake up and you just want to get on with the work and you want to get home kind of mindset. It allows you to be more in the moment, and it carries for me for at least to lunchtime, and then it goes out the window. Maybe I need to do it again at lunch. But Chris, I've got one final question for you, and since you've been on the show before, you've answered this, so I'm going to twist it around slightly. If you could sit down with every single person who's listening to this show now, mainly B2B millennial salespeople, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them that goes across all industries, that goes across all job types? What's the one piece of advice you'd give them to help them become better at selling?
By and large, if you just step back a little bit, not a lot, if you just step back and start taking the attitude, let's make time work for me a little more. Let's engage in a great process and let the deals come to me. As soon as I try to put in the mindset of, let this come to me, I will encourage it. That doesn't mean let it come to you passively. Still continue to encourage it. I make a lot more deals if I go from encouraging it to come to me and letting it come to me than if I go after it. This is not a passive approach. It's probably just dialing down just a little bit. And use delays to save time, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much more you get done.
Nice. I love it. Chris, with that, I want you to tell us two things. I want you to tell us a little bit about your book, and I want you to tell us a little bit about your newsletter as well, because I feel that's going to be really useful for anyone that is perhaps enjoyed the show, wants to learn a bit more, and then, obviously, then eventually they'll buy your book, I'm sure. This might be a nice leeway towards that.
All right. Well, the book is an easy read. And that's why I got the co-author that I got, Tal Raz, because I knew he would design the book so you could take in the information very, very quickly. The crazy thing, the reviews on Amazon.com, Tal sent me an email the other day saying, literally at least 1 in every 3 reviews says the book is life-changing. And all the others that are positive, and every now and then somebody throws in a negative, are about how easy it was to absorb the information, how quickly you could pick it up. A lot of people start talking about cutting deals when they're a third of the way through the book. One executive sent me an email saying that he bought the book, read it on a plane on the way to a deal, did a couple things that he read on a plane, and got the deal 2 weeks early. All of this says that the book's easy to absorb. If you're open to trying counterintuitive ideas, you will download this information really quickly. Another colleague / client has read the book 3 times already, which again tells you, and he's not Einstein. He's not reading the dictionary to learn an English language. It tells you the book is absorbable and you can pull it in quickly. And consistently, people are making great deals with it. And, they're not bragging about how they killed anybody, because when you kill somebody in a deal, what you've done is left somebody resentful behind you, and that's bad for business. So there isn't anybody said, I slaughtered this guy and he'll never be the same. That's bad for your reputation long term. So this is also about making great deals and having people who want to continue to deal with you.
And just share with us where we can sign up for your newsletter as well, because I know there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, the newsletter comes out twice a month, and we're always adding depth and specifics to what I talk about in the book. And so, the website is blackswanltd.com, and we've got a tab on the menu bar at the top on the right, a link to the blog. It pulls you into the blog. You can see all the things that we've written recently in the past, and you sign up and you get first crack at the information, which comes out twice a month, and a lot of people are really enjoying reading that. It adds to that depth of knowledge. It also helps sort of cue them up that day for how they want to negotiate. The pieces that we write are short. Nothing is more than 1,000 words, so we know everybody's busy. We want to help you get an edge each and every day that you go out into the jungle.
Good stuff. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, Chris, I want to thank you for your time again. I want to thank you for your insights. You use the word counterintuitive then, and a lot of them are, which makes them special, seemingly special to you. And so I appreciate all the work you've done in this field. I appreciate you being able to come on the show and put it across so succinctly. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And there we have it. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sales Nation, for listening as you're driving around to your sales meetings, and of course, watching this on YouTube as well. I'm waving to everyone who's watching this on YouTube right now. And if you haven't already, it's well worth checking out Conor Burt's episode yesterday, where we dive into not the tips, tactics, and techniques of sales, but how to more effectively learn them so you can compound your sales growth by investing into that episode. That's available at salesman.red/1 185. And with that all said, I'll speak with you all again tomorrow.